Welcome back, everyone, to another episode and happy Tuesday. I hope everybody's doing well. We've got a lot to cover today, and I'll be going through some unique topics, but going through leadership styles, uh, social programs, and we'll even be going a little further back and looking at the Gilded Age, which many supporters on the right look to or look at with rose colored glasses, but we'll be exploring that later in the show. But to tee us off, let's talk about some basic leadership principles. And there are plenty, and interchangeable here and there, but there are some that are so crucial that it trickles down from the top down in an organization. And the first one that I want to review with everyone is prioritization. So when you prioritize targets, goals, projects, prioritizing means you look at what is the most important things that need to be accomplished to meet your goal or to meet an immediate need in your organization. So with prioritizing, it's typically best to look at 3 items. And there's no specific 3 items, but there's typically 3 targets you look at, because anything beyond 3, if you have 4 priorities, 5 priorities, 6 priorities, what the hell is a priority at that point anyway? Nothing's a priority. You're scattered. You don't have a focused vision. You're wasting time and capital at other projects, and if nothing's a priority, then everything pretty much just goes up in flames and gets half the effort, maybe even less, than it needs to reach completion. But we'll start with that. You need 3 very, very important prioritizations. So with that, you look at Donald Trump's administration and his last 4 years. I mean, you could even go back to 2016, 2012, 2010, if you really want to go back. But MAGA has 3 very large priorities that they have their supporters marching to the drumbeat for. Notably, number 1 is illegal immigration. We are going for mass deportations. They're destroying the country. The illegals, they're flooding and they're tearing everything up. They're taking our jobs. They're taking our jobs from our people. They're bringing the drugs and the crime. Yeah, so they've been saying that for many years. The illegals, they're destroying everything. But illegals aren't drilled to a specific demographic. Now keep that in mind. Number 2, another one, diversity, equity, and inclusion. You should be hired on merit, not by the color of your skin, not by your ethnic background. Oh my goodness, background. You should be hired on merit. Think about that. And we'll dive into these in a little bit, but keep those 2 points on the top of your head there. And the last part is the economy. If Kamala wins, if Joe Biden gets another term, the economy is going to go to hell so fast. We're going to see a recession just like in 1929. It's going to be disastrous. Our economy is going straight to hell. And also tie that into the illegals are taking away money from our system, They're destroying our country. They're taking our jobs. Other countries, they have all of our jobs. I'm going to bring the jobs back to the United States. So think about that right there. So there's 3 major points there. And out of the 3 major talking points there that we have heard for over a decade now, what has been the one primary target? You could say it's diversity, equity, inclusion, because that pretty much covers it all. It's a social and civil divide. They're targeting anybody of a different skin color. They're targeting women. They are targeting individuals of different ethnic backgrounds. And that's why I pointed out in the earlier point that they hadn't drilled down exactly on who specifically the immigration problem was on. But it's everybody. They're taking advantage of our systems. They're flooding the country, destroying our economy. Rawr. The scare, if you cry wolf enough, eventually somebody's going to believe you, even though there is no wolf. Look, folks, listen. There are no wolves. Listen. But if you cry wolf enough, somebody's eventually going to listen. And that's exactly what they have accomplished. They have created an air of fear, anxiety, and paranoia. And that is the drumbeat that they're marching to. That they are having their country stripped from them. That they are having their rights stripped from them. Heaven forbid that the country based on collective accomplishment, the United States of America, remember that, because we'll dive into that a little bit later too. United States of America, heaven forbid that all of our citizens can play on an equal playing field. That's not fair. Equal playing fields aren't fair. Who are they not fair to? Think about that. What is the purpose? Or let me rephrase, what is the need, or why is there a need to equalize the playing field? If there wasn't disparity in our social and civil systems, there wouldn't be a need to have diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, systems, protections. Because we've visited merit-based hiring before. We've been there. And that's why we have DEI practices now, to ensure that individuals in the workplace get proper wages, that they aren't taken advantage of, that men and women of color, regardless of race, gender, age, background, can all have a fair shot at opportunity. That's the United States of America. That's the promise that everybody reaches for, that is blocked by a stained glass ceiling. The carrot of hope and prosperity, the hope of the American dream is just out of reach for so many people. And that is why, again, these programs exist, to give everybody a fair shot at reaching the American dream, giving them the tools, the ladder, step stool, whatever you want to call it, to stand on to get to the next level. But moving on to the other point here. So we've got DEI, they're illegal immigration. They're destroying the country. We're going to deport all the illegals. They're destroying our country. They're bringing in the drugs and the crime, and they're ravishing everything that we've done. Now, there are so many problems on the issue of illegal immigration. And sure, you need to come into the country legally. However, this goes back to, and I'll keep saying this, when you have a hammer and everything looks like a nail, and the Trump administration just does things for the sake of doing things, and they have no collective end goal here. And you'll see why in just a second. But let's deport everybody. MAGA supporters. Yeah, we're going to get rid of everybody. We're taking our country back. All right, let's hypothetical scenario. All the illegals get deported. They all got shipped out in 1 month. Let's just say the most complete imagination of their plans took place. Let's just say everything went well and all illegals are replaced or deported. Now you have an issue of voids in the workforce. Nobody's planned for that. There hasn't been a plan for that. You're deporting everybody. Okay, now agricultural industries are being impacted. Hospitality industries are being impacted. Government agencies are being impacted. There's so many industries that are now facing the crisis of no labor. How do you fill that void? So that immediately is going to send a shock out into the economy. And when prices start to rise, not only because of tariffs, but because there is no labor to complete the jobs of the individuals that were sent out of the country, it's like, what do you expect is going to happen? Price is going to increase. But now the next question is, who do you put in these spots? Yeah, who has been fighting to work in the agricultural industry or the overnights at hotels and resorts, and who has been fighting for that? Because that's never made it to mainstream media. That's never, there's jobs available all the time. They're always available. But let's look at Florida. Let's look at Florida. Within the last couple of weeks, they've been working to pass a law to allow children as young as the age of 14 and have expanded the existing laws regarding minors in the workforce of 16 and 17, which are common across many states, to be able to work more hours, to become less regulated. And it's being championed as a good thing. Yeah, back in the old days, back when I was a kid, we worked jobs like that. What's wrong with that? Let's go back to that. That's the phrase of the day. Let's go back. They want to replace in Florida the positions of those that were deported with children. Again, if we look at the big ask, or the question of this is, things happen because there is a need. If you're looking to expand the age of child labor in the workforce down to 14 to replace the individuals that are deported out of the United States, that tells me that you don't have the individuals or the plan in place, the contingency plan in place, to have an immediate, legal, and articulate action on your labor force. Why the hell are we bringing 14-year-olds into this, 15-year-olds? Sure, if there are programs for them to have jobs, but you shouldn't be trying to expand your state's law to allow 14 and 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds to work overnight on school weeks. It's true. Look it up. It's damn true. That's what they're trying. That is their plan. What happened to all the individuals fighting for these jobs? We're bringing jobs back to America. For who? Kids? They're talking about bringing the iPhone production back to the United States. If Florida is already trying to actively throw children into overnight operations, could you imagine what this side of the political spectrum, this MAGA right side, would do with these other industries that are they're trying to pull back, that are historically connected with child labor and poor working conditions? And who does that benefit? Benefits nobody. Doesn't benefit anybody. But the big picture here is, think about it. The illegals, other countries, they're destroying everything. They're our enemies. We've been raped and pillaged on trade for so long. We've been taken advantage of by other countries, flooding in from the southern borders. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime. Elections are rigged, illegals are voting. And there's just so much of that fear brought up here, because their primary message, again, stay clear and consistent with your messaging. That is a principle of leadership. If you stay clear and persistent on your messaging, then your team will understand their priorities and what they need to focus on. And with that being said, let's go back. As Donald Trump said, the United States of America was its strongest and most prosperous during the Gilded Age. But the important piece of this, the definition of gilded, and I'm going to put it up right here on the screen for everybody to see. Gilded definition. Number one, covered thinly with gold leaf or gold paint. Another meaning, wealthy and privileged. So I have talked in prior episodes about cutting through the bullshit, the noise, what's presented at the surface level. And to reiterate, the illegals are flooding in, they're taking our jobs, they're ruining the economy. Rah, 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 rah. And I keep saying this to prove a point, because that is what is being presented to us. That's what's being presented. So think of that as gilded. Think of that as gilded. It's wrapped in a nice layer of gold, just like the 1870s through the 1910s. You look back and industry was booming. We saw economic expansion like no other period in American history. Still weren't at our strongest point yet, but there was industrial expansion to that time that the world had never seen before. That part is accurate. So when you look back and you see that kind of expansion and innovation in the period, you're like, wow, holy smokes, it did look good. There's just so much money going around. And there was a lot compared to any other area. For in the context of the times, everything was remarkable at surface level. And that's where the gilded part comes in. Wrapped. Think about that word, wrapped in gold. A thin layer of gold. A thin layer of gold. I'll say that one more time. Wrapped in a thin layer of gold. Now, why'd I have to triple down on that? Because when you start to peel away at that layer of gold wrapped around the Gilded Age era, then the ugly starts to come out. Where people were working for 60 and 70 hours a week to keep the wealthiest of individuals rich while they were being paid pennies, even comparable to modern day standards. Could you imagine working a 70-hour work week and finishing the year making $20,000 and under? That was the day-to-day life of individuals that worked in the factories of these wealthy business moguls at the time. The working class was being taken advantage of. Workplace conditions were unsafe. Thousands and thousands of people died week to week. And that's true too. You look that up. And hundreds of thousands more were injured or died annually in the workplace. And nobody gave a damn about them. Nobody did. It's all about the money. It's all about the money. And if you look at the stark historical parallel that we find ourselves on today, tax cuts to the rich, the people at the top, it's going to incentivize them to create more jobs. And the money's going to trickle down. That money never makes its way down. It stays at the top. When you have tens and hundreds of billions of dollars and 1% of the country has more money than the other 99% combined, you tell me where it's trickled down to. It stayed in a pocketbook. It's found its form in the shapes of yachts and other luxuries and islands and bank accounts overseas, and it's never found its way down. You need to build from the bottom up and the middle out. Because how the hell else did the people up there get to where they were? By exploiting the working class. Just like in the Gilded Age that Trump says he wants America to go back to, and he wants his Trump Golden Age to be the Gilded Age 2.0. Nobody wants to go back to that. Hell no. And that's why so many people are angry. That's why so many people are finally vocalizing, like, we don't want to go back to that. We spent over a century fighting for progress for women, for the blacks, for kids, for other ethnic minorities to have a position in the United States to play fairly. And now we find ourselves in a position to fight against old ghosts in new garments to preserve the progress that those before us accomplished. because now they want to go back to a time where the privileges were exclusively for their own benefit. Think about this. Think about it. When you go back to 1965, where President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Acts, and segregation began to slowly dissolve into the pages of history. Think about that. The years that followed after, there were tumultuous times. There was still infighting. What were the old days back then were closer. It was like the rear view mirror. Things appear closer than they really seem. Except in this scenario, they were years separate, or separated 5 years, 10 years. You know, going from 1965 to 1976, you've got a 11-year window there that the population has had to digest the ending of segregation. And the blacks and whites of society can coexist together, and equal rights for all individuals and all citizens of the United States. That's what that was about. Then 1976 rolls around, and a candidate by the name of Ronald Reagan comes up, and he spewed out a character that sounded so fictionally based that people didn't believe him. It was a woman known by the name of Linda Taylor, but her atrocities against the American government, long story short, she was guilty of taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from government welfare programs, and had so many different aliases and 30 different names, master of disguise, changed her ethnicity often. But the part that we want to drill down on, even though that Linda Taylor didn't, she was registered as a white woman when she was attending school, and she would change her race depending on who she was talking to or where she would feel the advantage was. The important thing about her is what Ronald Reagan labeled her as. He labeled her as the welfare queen. And that's where that term originated. That still comes out, or still rings out today. The Linda Taylor of the 1970s, with her fur coats and driving her Cadillac, was a black woman from Chicago. That is the image that Ronald Reagan played on. That was the image that the Republican Party at that time played on. It's the blacks and the other minorities that are manipulating the United States government systems and taking advantage of them. And that cry has been going on decade after decade after decade after decade. And the only difference that has changed from 1976 to 2025 is Linda Taylor is no longer driving a Cadillac, it's a Mercedes Benz. And she got her nails did. Once again, old ghosts in new garments. We've been here before. America has been here before. And the overarching issue that I have talked about today was, and in previous videos, is don't believe the facade that they present to you in the media. And by they, I mean the MAGA right, the Trump administration, all of his loyal Magadonians. Don't listen to them. Don't listen to them, because their cry for wolf, when you look down in the look down into what it actually impacts underneath the facade of the illegals are taking over the country. Look at who the illegals really are. You've got the SAVE Act, HR 22, that they're trying to press forward. Over 60 million women, 60 million married women in the United States will lose their eligibility under this law to vote. American women who have the right to vote will lose their right to vote because their name, their married name, doesn't match the one that's on their driver's license. Therefore, more bureaucratic hurdles are put up to manipulate elections. The cry is illegals are cheating in elections, but they're targeting American women. When you look at the illegals are taking advantage of our social programs, illegals don't get paid out on social programs. They pay in to social programs that American citizens benefit from. If all illegal immigrants, let's go back to the scenario from earlier in this video. If the plan went perfectly and all illegal immigrants were sent out of this country right now, the United States would immediately see an impact of over $300 billion in lost revenues. That's in a combination of taxes and production, agriculture, hospitality, all the industries that are historically redlined for minorities. And while we're talking about minorities on that end, let's circle back to Ron DeSanctimonious and Florida trying to put children in the workforce as young as 14 years old. There was a need to put workplace restrictions into effect for children in the workforce. Now rolling that back 2 more years and then expanding or limiting the protections of individuals 16 and 17 years old. The one that currently stands as 16 and 17 are the youngest that you can have in the workforce, commonly across multiple states. But the point about this is, for those individuals, there's a historic parallel when you look at this, that children who enter the workforce earlier typically are subjugated to staying in low paying, high risk jobs for the rest of their lives. And then from there forward, there is a higher percentage for families to be impacted generation after generation of being caught up in low paying, high risk, unsafe jobs. And that's what they want to roll back to. We've seen this before. So when you have these individuals, you've got 14-year-olds now that are working overnight during a school week, and they go to school and they're tired, they're exhausted, they can't focus. They're not going to perform at their best. And we don't need 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds in the workforce to prove to us what we already see every day. When you have individuals in socially limited communities that are already pigeonholed by a system that seems as if it was designed to keep them there, to keep these individuals from obtaining higher educational opportunities, to keep them from obtaining the American dream, from escaping poverty. But all the plans this administration has put forward seems like that is where we are headed. But again, there's no connected dots, but the singular message rings true. And that is they want to destabilize the economy. They want to cause dysfunction. They want to turn us against one another, and they want to continue the attack on education. And speaking on education, and we'll finish up on this note because this ties into everything, the child laborers in Florida that they're trying to bring in, and the sewing factories and iPhone production to put more kids in the workforce. But what is so terrifying about this is we'll look at Mississippi as a perfect example here, as a state that is like passionately conservative. And there's nothing wrong with that. But this is a state that overwhelmingly supported Donald Trump in all three of his political campaigns. And their reward was having over $130 million stripped from their education system. $130 million. That was extended and provided by Joe Biden's administration towards the end of 2024. But, historically, the red states don't ever want to give the Democratic president any kind of benefit of the doubt. But before Joe Biden left office, Mississippi had a educational package of over $130 million that the state planned for to help provide in their social programs for students experiencing homelessness and food shortages, to repair their schools and their facilities, to hire mental health providers, and create the infrastructure for kids to learn and thrive. And now the state is preparing to tell the vendors they have already assigned to tasks, that projects that they've been working on, they're already preparing. Well, if the Trump administration took all this money back because they claim that the Biden administration offering them this aid was unnecessary, so they rolled it back. Thanks, Doge, doggy. Thanks. This is where the savings come from. Pulling this $130 million back. Now the state is openly acknowledging that they are going to default on payments to the vendors that they have already hired to begin a lot of these tasks. And it's going to cost them even more money in legal pursuits. This is the nonsense that this administration has put in the whole country through. Whether you voted for them or not, and Mississippi is just one state. Just one. Think about this. The Department of Education was to level the playing field across our entire country. The United States of America. The United States, not a conglomeration of loosely connected territories under one flag. This is the United States of America. All individuals should play by the same rules, should have access to the same opportunities, should be privileged to walk the path toward the American dream. And that's what you need to fight to preserve. And that's what I am fighting to preserve. But think about what we talked about today, and I'll see you next time.